Welcome to our week 11 lecture, AI in Education. So last week we looked at AI in organizations and really the back of the house, specifically marketing and communications. This week we're going to kind of go front of the house and explore how AI transforms the way we teach and engage with our audiences. Most organizations and museums and galleries and other things should not be a silent temple. They're a conversational space. And our goal is to understand how to use AI to make art feel personal, relevant, and accessible to everyone, from a 5-year-old on a school trip to a lifelong arts scholar. Important thing to realize, as I've hit over and over throughout this class, is AI is most useful as a support layer, a guide, an explainer, a translator, or a writing assistant. It becomes risky when it starts replacing expertise or flattening cultural nuance. So it kind of makes things generic. But there are lots of benefits. If a museum has 50,000 objects and only a small staff, AI can help surface more pathways into that collection and would let you allow to focus on curation. But deciding what matters and what is sensitive and what should be emphasized is the human job. The goal is not to remove the teacher, the curator, or the educator. The goal is to make their reach bigger. And I just have a simple rule when we're talking about this. Use AI to support work, not to outsource responsibility. Think about a traditional museum tour you might be on. And you go through it, you're seeing impressionistic paintings. Everyone hears the same 20-minute speech as you go from painting to painting. Well, AI removes this idea for having to do a one-size-fits-all and provides personalized dialogues. If the visitor is interested in the chemistry of the paint, the AI can focus there. If they care about the political history of the painting, it pivots to that. So lots of different benefits on that. One is kind of the tutor and coach model that AI adapts to the complexity of the user. So while it might explain expressionism to a 10-year-old child of what the techniques are, for a PhD student, it might talk about how those techniques have been used over time and how they can be applied to another painter's work. Socratic dialogue. So again, that back and forth. So moving away from static wall text to interactive Q&A sessions. Nonlinear learning. That basically allows visitors to choose their own path, choose their own adventure, if you will. So they can follow their own rabbit holes rather than have a set path. That also explains kind of the different points of entry. AI can identify a visitor's entry point through a quick interaction and find out what they know, what they don't know, and then provide content that is neither too simple nor too complex for them. And finally, mission scaling. Again, being able to reach thousands of students with that tutor level kind of quality, that kind of information on a nonprofit budget is really an exciting thing on the educational side. An example of this is the Met and their Art Explorer. They are one of the benchmarks for museum education, and they've gone from a static archive into an active discovery engine. Their Art Explorer tool leverages AI to analyze the Met's 400,000 digitized artworks through pattern detection and tagging of the works. So the tool automatically pulls and links artist biographies from open sources like Wikipedia, creating context around every artifact. So it finds all the information relevant to that painting at your fingertips. So that moved the power of the curator into the hands of the students and the public. A visitor is no longer limited by a specific gallery layout. They can follow their own thoughts to cross cultures and eras, discovering connections that even a PhD scholar might not have documented. The lesson there is, how do we make a collection useful? That's not just sitting in storehouses. It just has a simple description. We basically make it useful to, almost 4 billion people with internet access. Because I believe a museum's value is measured not just by what it has, but how easily someone can use it to discover something new. And the Met definitely does that. Another example, more about the access side of learning, is the Mead Art Museum and creating audio descriptions for their online collection. And they're basically looking at access, not just using AI as a novelty. Because they had 20,000 objects in their digitized collection, they had a challenge trying to figure out high quality audio descriptions for every one of those pieces. So they implemented a hybrid workflow using ChatGPT. And when they implemented these inclusive tools, it contributed to higher attendance as the museum became more welcoming to diverse audiences with varying accessibility needs. The lesson there is that AI can expand access and reduce administrative work for staff. The goal was to service to audiences, not replacing curator judgment there. Again, not novelty, it's accessibility. Human review will remain part of the process, and museums cannot assume AI descriptions are accurate, culturally sensitive, or visually precise without review. That's what the Mead had to do. They had to go through a whole review session. Responsible AI use often looks boring in some ways, but the best way of using AI is make sure it's useful, it's been human reviewed, audience centered, and has clear bounds around it. Interactive tools, again, we've talked about this idea of dialogue, basically having a back and forth with art. And that makes art and history feel alive for students who might find a static textbook boring. So these conversational environments often can have even AI avatars of artists or historical figures that are actually talking to students. So imagine if you have conversational environments using natural language. So it's like, why is the sculpture crying? What is it doing? And having a very conversational answer, not some dry kind of description on that one. AI overlays. So basically pointing a phone at a sculpture and getting more information about it or seeing it from different angles. I do like the AI avatars thing. So again, historical figures like chatting with an AI-powered Van Gogh or Abraham Lincoln based on verified primary sources is very exciting. And then multi-sensory scapes. Immersive art where the AI doesn't just show you data, it creates a physical environment, lets you feel, smell, and hear the AI's internal processing of that data. Finally, gesture-based engagement, AI that responds to visitor movement, like the Cleveland Museum's Art Lens. The key in all this is you must have grounded data and verified data from humans. You don't want your AI Lincoln avatar making up facts. So you want to ground it in the actual archives of your museum and verified sources so it only speaks from the truth. Example of a really good job of interactivity just opened up in Los Angeles earlier this year. It's Dataland, and it's the first kind of true AI museum. It contains AI art that is a living AI engine. Founded by Refik Anadol Studios, it's dedicated to data visualization and machine learning as a multi-sensory experience. So their AI engine throughout the building moves beyond text or static images. It ingests massive amounts of data from NASA, the Smithsonian, national parks, and then translates this data into different outputs. It's almost like an AI dream, so to speak. So if an AI dreams of a coral reef, it simultaneously generates 3D visuals, a spatial soundscape, a molecular engineered scent that mimics the ocean. It's a complete surreal experience. And what's interesting is this museum has no permanent collection in the traditional sense because the art constantly evolves every minute based on real-time climate data. If it's sunny outside, it's going to be different with the AI. If it's cloudy or rainy, it'll be different with that. And then the visitor interaction. How many people are in the room? What are they looking at on the screen? What are they not looking at? So it's fascinating. And one of the big benefits for that is the museum has reported visitors spend 4 times longer in exhibits compared to traditional galleries, probably because of all that interaction and differences that happen. What makes Dataland so exciting is it demonstrates the idea that technology is most successful when it disappears into the experience. Visitors don't come to see an AI or a computer server. They come to see the dream. And the AI is just the man behind the curtain that allows the story to be told. Provenance is another big area. We've talked about this before when we talked about bias and inclusion. But something we need to look at for education as well. Are we sure that we're documenting an object or a language, their origin, their ownership correctly? And there are lots of things that are doing this. Small language models. There's about 7,000 languages out there that lack a digital footprint, but they're important. In arts education, they allow for hyper-local storytelling that respects cultural nuances that global AI often flattens or ignores. Pattern recognitions. We can go ahead and have students look at AI heat maps to see where a master's hand on a painting is likely present versus a student or late restorer, giving an idea how the painting was originally done from start to finish. We can also decode history or discover an object's journey. So that's a very fascinating thing, thinking of all the years of cultural plunder of basically of the original where an artifact was and then where it ended up in a museum. In those cases, students aren't just reading about history, they're using AI to find red flags in ownership. Maybe an example of a painting reappearing in a Munich auction in 1938 with no previous record. So where'd it come from? How did it get there? Interesting ideas on that one. And then finally, borderless education. One of the things the AI has been doing is the idea of creating a digital twin. When I talk about digital twin, it's like a 3D virtual clone of a physical object or site that you can go ahead and send off anywhere. So even if the digital object is lost to time or disaster, the knowledge and the experience of the object are permanently accessible to future generations. Think about like the dodo. You know, it's been extinct since the early 1900s. What if we could have a real 3D version of that interacts with people, that responds to certain cues and things like that? That's very exciting. As we spoke about in last week, when we talked about bias and inclusion, we talked about that many cultures are fighting back to reclaim their identity and ensure that they are not digitally erased. We mentioned the Nahuatl that had AI models, the very simple generic ones, that were basically compressing their rituals into a version of Aztec history rather than their actual traditions. The Nahuatl community fought back to become active architects of their own digital future, using a community-owned AI tool to help basically preserve the language. So it ingested the language and has a database of that without having to sell its data to corporations. They didn't want someone else to save it, they saved it themselves. The lesson here is that for you as arts managers, you must protect the data DNA of your organization. If your organization has a unique archive, don't just give it to the public AI, protect it. Some watch outs. We talk about the benefits there of how AI is being used in education, but there are some things to consider. One is that AI can backfire, and we see it almost weekly, examples of where AI use is called out and there's lots of criticism. And so it can be a tremendous backlash in the arts, because what do arts organizations rely on? They rely on artist goodwill and public trust. So if they lose that trust, they might lose membership, attendance, things like that. When you're using promotional imagery that maybe is symbolic, it still says what the organization values. And if a group claims to support artists, but is using AI to create artistic work instead of hiring that actual artist, audiences notice. And there are two more recent examples I want to call out. One is the Queensland Symphony Orchestra. Very simple. They use an AI-generated image in a Facebook ad. But there's an instant criticism among most of their membership and even the media about how it's a low-quality image and it was disrespectful to a organization that is supposed to be respectful of artists and audiences. Critics argue that the ad should have led to a real photo shoot. Why did not happen? Big criticism there. Another one is the Oakland First Fridays. Again, another kind of AI-generated flyer art. And if this is an arts organization, an arts event, it conflicts with the event's mission of uplifting local artists. Now, organizers said they were experimenting amid resource pressures. They had a small organization, but they should have been uplifting local artists instead of replacing artists for an artist event. So a couple of things. The learning there is that don't always go for the easy or the cheapest, because sometimes the easiest or the cheapest creates the most expensive reputational damage. Make sure you're using AI carefully. Watch outs to look at and everything. The four big ones on the side there are basically AI slop. We see that all the time. Data leaks, bias, and hallucinations. So when I think of AI slop, it's basically if we're using AI for everything, we're going to get generic content that audiences ignore. So again, as we mentioned, use AI to save time, to reduce administrative work, but make sure that time saved is being used to create general, uniquely human content. For data leaks, it's very easy to enter all of our information into a public AI like ChatGPT. But you need to be careful with that because you might not violate privacy laws. There could be a data breach. So the practice is never input PII, personally identifiable information, into a public LLM. Use AI tools built specifically for nonprofits that have firewalls to prevent that kind of stuff. Bias, which I talked about that a little bit with provenance. AI using it can often create generic results. We got to make sure that any output that we're creating is being reviewed by a human to make sure that is not happening. Finally, hallucinations. AI makes up stuff sometimes, makes up facts, makes up artistic work, all those different things. Again, you've got to have a human in the loop there. Basically, they're cross-referencing it with actual data to make sure that those things are correct. That's a big issue. I have a checklist for arts educators that I kind of look at for how AI will fit and not. And basically, it helps people learn, understand, access, and participate with AI while staying accurate and transparent. Those are kind of the criteria to figure out if AI is worth using. You don't want to replace relationships. You don't want to just produce spectacle. You want AI to have value. The value usually comes in things like accessibility, explanation, and translation. It's key that you're not replacing expertise. Human in the loop really matters. Probably the most important one on that checklist is that final one. Clarity matters more than novelty. Does it make sense? Is it true? Is it useful for what you're putting it into? Now, the arts are already about interpretation, connection, and public meaning making. AI should strengthen those things, not weaken them. For museums, galleries, schools, and outreach teams, the best AI use is often the quiet kind, the kind that helps people feel more included and more informed. We don't want AI for novelty. We don't want to use AI for everything. It has targeted use. With that, that's a lecture for this week. I'm going to talk a little bit here about discussion 7. So we've already talked about throughout this course about how AI is being used for museums, galleries, and cultural organizations, and I gave you some examples today. So lots of exciting possibilities, but there are questions about the impact. So the question I have for you in this week's discussion is, how can AI be used to deepen public engagement with the arts without compromising the authenticity of these institutions? So again, how do we deepen public engagement without compromising authenticity? So some questions to think about in this discussion would be like, what opportunities do you see for AI to make the arts more accessible? I've given you some examples. Where might AI-based engagement feel more like a novelty or like a gimmick, and because of that, it feels very impersonal? How should curators or artists balance innovation with their missions and audience needs? And finally, another question you can think about would be, what would a meaningful AI-enhanced experience look like in your own field or organization? As with all these discussions, I love real-world examples of things that you've seen or ideas you'd like to try. The more it relates to what you do, the better off the discussion question is going to be. And that is it for this week's lecture.